All right, thanks to you at home for joining us. Rachel has the night off, but she will be back next week. Well, welcome to day 7 of the government shutdown. And with New Year's Eve just around the corner, there seems to be remarkably little urgency on Capitol Hill about ending the stalemate and reopening the government. In fact, there was barely any noticeable activity on Capitol Hill today. NBC News reported today that Vice President Mike Pence told Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer the White House would climb way down from Trump's bravado and settle for half of the $5 billion Donald Trump had been demanding for his precious border wall. But that was last Saturday, and there have been no new offers from either side since. In a few minutes, we'll be talking with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal about how Democrats plan to tackle the shutdown when they take over the House in a few days, and also what they'll do about the Trump administration's actions at the border writ large, an issue on which Representative Jayapal has become a leading progressive voice. And speaking of that new Democratic majority in just a few days, they have an ambitious agenda planned, including getting the government operating again, introducing new anti-corruption and voting rights legislation, and jump-starting investigations into the Trump administration that Republicans had not been all that interested in when they were in charge. But one thing Democrats did not expect to have to deal with on day one is a House seat that is still contested because of an election marred by alleged fraud. It's a situation for which there is no clear playbook. And today we got confirmation that the House will not have its full complement of 435 members when the new Congress is sworn in. It will only have 434. Now, you've likely heard something by now about the craziness in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. It's a race that had been called for the Republican, a race in which the Democrat, in fact, conceded the day after the election. Republican Mark Harris had defeated the GOP incumbent in the primary and then went on to win the general election by 905 votes over the Democrat Dan McCready. A week later, Harris tweeted out this photo from the U.S. Capitol, the incoming congressional freshman class. There he is toward the back, looking all happy. Seemed like a done deal. But when it came time for the North Carolina State Board of Elections to certify the results of that race, it voted unanimously not to certify North Carolina's District 9. The 9-member state board, made up of 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 1 unaffiliated member, they all voted not to certify this race, which was a surprise to pretty much everybody. And the reason they refused to certify it was the apparent tomfoolery that went on with the absentee mail-in ballots in the race in one county in particular, with an unusually high number of absentee ballots being requested and an unusually high percentage of those ballots never being returned. And of those that were returned, an unusually high percentage of those going for Mark Harris, the Republican. The North Carolina Democratic Party submitted to the state elections board several affidavits from black voters in that county, many of them elderly, saying that people came to their homes and collected their absentee ballots, in some cases offering to fill out the ballots for them. For instance, one woman swore in her affidavit that a woman came to her house saying she was collecting people's absentee ballots in the area. Quote, "I filled out 2 names on the ballot, for sheriff and for Board of Education. She stated the others were not important. I gave her the ballot and she said she would finish it herself. I signed the ballot and she left. It was not sealed up at the time." The guy allegedly at the center of these shenanigans is named McCrae Dowless. He was personally hired by Republican candidate Mark Harris. Now, what's amazing is that Dowless was also at the center of an alleged mail ballot scam back in 2016. He even got on an episode of the public radio program This American Life about it. State elections officials even referred McCrae Dowless and his mail ballot scam to federal prosecutors after the 2016 election. But it doesn't appear that anything ever came of it. And as all of this began to come out after last month's election, what had looked like a razor-thin victory for an upstart Republican in North Carolina's 9th district has become a giant mess. Going all the way back to the primary, people have also started raising questions about Mark Harris's narrow victory there. So the North Carolina Elections Board opened an investigation. That board has the power to order a new election if they decide that's what's needed. And the board ultimately scheduled a public hearing on the allegations for January 11th. But here's the thing about the North Carolina Board of Elections. When North Carolina voters ousted the state's Republican governor in 2016 and elected a Democrat, Roy Cooper, the Republican legislature pulled a surprise move to try and strip the incoming Democratic governor of his powers. It's a play being tried by Republicans in other states where Democrats won statewide this year. But North Carolina Republicans were kind of the pioneers of this strategy back in 2016. Democrat gets elected governor, take away power from the governor's office. And one place Republicans took away Roy Cooper's power was by creating a new and different state board of elections that Cooper would have less control over than his Republican predecessor. And ever since they did that at the end of 2016, Cooper and the Republicans in the state legislature have been battling in court over whether that new GOP-created elections board is constitutional. And the upshot of this court battle over Republicans' democracy-defying power grab 2 years ago is that just now, today, a court ordered the state elections board dissolved. So right in the middle of this investigation into this still up-in-the-air congressional race, less than a week before the new Congress convenes in Washington, as of noon today, there is no more North Carolina State Board of Elections. And as that board goes up in smoke, the position of Mark Harris and the North Carolina Republican Party appears to have solidified into outright opposition to any further investigation. Even though earlier this month they were expressing concern about fraud and saying they were open to a new election, today North Carolina Republicans are demanding that Mark Harris be seated in the new Congress next week, saying that he was duly elected and that there will never be a new election. When Governor Cooper announced today that he will appoint an interim board of elections to continue the 9th District investigations, Republicans said that they would refuse to participate, which prompted Cooper to send this letter to the chair of the state Republican Party today, saying basically, you can't tell me what to do. Quote, the governor's lawyer writes, their governor will not be impeded from exercising his duties under the Constitution to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. The governor will also not permit your obstructionist tactics to stall an ongoing investigation. One is compelled to conclude that you are withholding your nominations and encouraging people not to serve solely for the purpose of impeding and obstructing the 9th Congressional District investigation, unquote. And maybe Republicans in North Carolina were hoping that if they created enough chaos and got the investigation stopped and doubled down on their candidate, then seating Mark Harris in the new Congress would start to seem like kind of a foregone, inevitable conclusion. Well, that is not what's happening.
If Mr. Harris is not certified as the duly, fairly, legally elected member, we would certainly oppose his seating. And as I understand it, that verification has not come. In fact, Republican leaders in North Carolina have said that there is substantial question as to the validity of the outcome of the general election. That's in court now, as you know.
Right.
We'll see what the court does, but it is clear, apparently from all sides, that there was fraud committed by certain participants in the administration of the election. Under those circumstances, we ought to have a new election for the general election, not the primary. The primary was not contested, but for the general election.
That was Steny Hoyer of Maryland, who will be the majority leader in the House in just a few days, confirming that Congress will not seat Mark Harris when the new Congress convenes, which means the incoming freshman class in Congress will be one member short. He was so close. Joining us now is Michael Bitzer, a politics professor at North Carolina's Catawba College, the brains behind the Old North State Politics blog, and a preeminent expert on how things work in North Carolina. Professor Bitzer, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So let's go back and let's start with what is the prevailing sort of legal framework here? Is there a provision in North Carolina state law that would set the parameters for and the conditions where you'd have to have a new election?
Well, we do have a general statute that did lay out the process by which a state board of elections could decide to call a new election. There were 4 criteria, and everybody was looking at the 4th criteria regarding the number of irregularities that potentially could taint. Didn't say anything necessarily about whether the irregularities would overturn the previous decision and the votes and the majority. But now we're kind of operating in legal no man's land. Some would argue that the governor's power to fill vacancies does exist and that he would be able to create this interim state board of elections that would carry on until January 31st, when the new board, which was voted yesterday by an override of his veto, would go into effect. Republicans in the legislature contend there is no state board of elections because the previous law, the statute, was struck down as unconstitutional. So we're kind of in uncharted legal territory. Both sides are going to be making their arguments, and I think we're just going to have to watch and see what the dominoes are in terms of does the governor go ahead and appoint 5 new members, and how do the Republicans react?
Well, if Governor Cooper just went ahead and made the appointment, what could Republicans do about it? If they're refusing to participate in the board and the governor says, well, I'm going to use my executive authority to see that the laws are faithfully executed and put a board in place, what could Republicans in the legislature even do about it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think we quite know. There have been threats of lawsuits filed. This whole fiasco has been legally bound. The courts have been interjected into this process. So I would not be surprised if we didn't end up before another 3-judge panel in regards to a potential interim board. The legislature can always come back into session and try and establish an interim board or some kind of contingency before the official board takes control at the end of January. Again, we're just kind of waiting to see who plays the next part in this game and how does everybody respond. Another actor in all of this, as you've mentioned, is the U.S. House of Representatives, and that they may ultimately have the final say in all of this.
Right. And so just let's talk about that for a moment, because it's already been made clear by Steny Hoyer, the incoming majority leader, they're not seating Mark Harris. That's not going to happen. So then what would happen? Could the Congress order its own investigation? And then let's say they find there was election fraud. Then what?
Well, then you have basically a 2-tier process going on. We've got an investigation going on, and we think we're going to have a hearing on January 11th. That's open for discussion and debate because we don't technically have, from some points of view, a state board of elections to oversee that hearing. The U.S. House, through the House Administration Committee, could conceivably start their own investigation, seek the records, seek the documents that the state board has already gathered through its professional staff, and hold their own hearings and inquiry into it. Now, Representative Steny Hoyer did indicate that he would only go for a general election, but the state statute here in North Carolina says filling a vacancy for a U.S. House election would require a new primary as well. And that's a battle line that you see both Democrats and Republicans arguing over as well. So there are so many moving parts and layers to this that I don't think we quite legally know where things are going to play out until more movement is done by somebody at some point.
Wow, I think this technically qualifies as a hot mess. Michael Bitzer, politics professor and leading analyst for this fascinating North Carolina story / hot mess. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And still ahead, a new year does not always mean a fresh start. More on that ahead. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.